Why, yes, good morning, or good afternoon now. It's the 2nd of October. It's the day we remember solemnly and the guardian angels. I kind of believe that every human is a created being and therefore deserves great respect from the heart because, as I may have said before, each of us develops and progresses at the pace we do, and we end up at the place we do at any one time in our life. I don't know where Mr. Dawkins, the subject of this video is, would be at this moment in his life, or the things that he's thinking of, or the beliefs that he may be modifying or even changing. But from the research and movies and videos that he's produced, and some reading, I've come to a fairly good understanding of his viewpoints and understandings of life, of thinking, of truth and the non-existence of truth, or maybe the very strong truth that he promotes, or his brand of truth. He actually does promote a truth. It would be that found in the classrooms of evolutionary biology in Cambridge, Oxford, and I believe he's a professor there, unless he's retired. I don't keep up on Mr. Dawkins and Professor Dawkins. I just study, what he's said and done. The only reason I've done that is because I have someone very important to me who told me once there was no more truth, and that, to quote, it was a settled issue, and said it quite assuredly, as if it was a settled issue. Oh, well, I hadn't heard this. I'm an autodidact or autodidact, and flunked out of college and just went right into the business world, and then took care of that for the next 77, 87, 97, 25 years, 23 years. And that was an adventure in itself, knowing what capitalism, by direct experience is about, instead of viewing it from the intimacy of the outside with a large capitalist, or a capitalist, in charge of a large concern. Anyway, or actually several, but when you're actually doing it, in the middle of it, it can be quite revealing. Mr. Dawkins, on the other hand, has spent his life in the confines of the university, quite well known and quite well respected in evolutionary biology. That would necessarily dictate that one was an evolutionist and a biologist, just by virtue of its title. I think I'm going to name this video against Dawkins, or anti-Dawkins. In the German, anti would mean against, and spelled basically the same way, except with a couple of dots over the I believe over the I, A-N-T-I. There's a book written by Engels called Anti-Düring. Düring in Germany at the same time Engels was, or at least Düring was there. Engels wrote this fabulous book against a fellow leftist. Of course, Engels was a far leftist. I would say that I'm even further to the left, but in any case, Engels, who was somewhat brilliant, used a great deal of difficult syntax to make his points, but once you've read it 10 times, you understand. Oh, you cross out the unnecessary adjectives and adverbs and get to the point of what's being described and why and in what way and what's being said about it. But in the end, I think what it is a proposition that Düring is absolutely wrong. And so in this video, I think I'd like to not be as difficult or harsh as Engels was, but after some research, and as I say, I think I'm prepared to speak just a little bit about Mr. Dawkins, or Professor, as I'm sure he'd like to be called, as some doctors insist. Since they have the title, they would probably stop you in mid-sentence and say, no, I'm Professor Dawkins. To me, he's just Mr. Dawkins, or Richard. I suppose maybe his friends call him Dick. Some people might call him a dick. I don't. I respect him as a human, and as every human deserves respect, like myself. We all popped out of the same places and or the similar places to one another, and breathed our first breath with clenched fists and probably very scared or very unaccustomed to the cooler air and nothing around us, just this blank space instead of the comfort of the womb. And ever since then, all of us have been, finding our way. Now, Mr. Dawkins has tread upon a very tenuously acquired spiritual understanding of many people, and that's his responsibility for having done so. I don't know what his particular resentments are or why, but he spent a great deal, or if not most of his money, gained through being a professor and perhaps writing books, to produce videos or movies, short ones or long ones or short pieces, well produced, high quality, derisively speaking about people of faith, every kind of faith. It doesn't really matter to Mr. Dawkins which faith it could be. All to them seem ridiculous and worthless. And probably that's because he's in a very small group of people on the earth who don't have any faith of any kind, at least to his own admission. He's an evolutionist, but to believe in that theory, you have to believe in death. Things have to die for that whole theory to work, which to me is an evil, sort of terrible thing. And plus, as the creationist he interviewed points out, if it was true, there would be a plethora of evidence from the mud, things crawling out of the mud till now, and there isn't. There's just very few. I think there's less than a dozen somewhat agreed upon proofs that indicate something, or at least something they agree upon. Often they'll show you a picture of walking men, one behind the other and one shorter than the other, as proof that there was a progression of skeletal-like human sort of beings but really there's no in fact I don't know if there's even one skeletal or cranial evidence other than maybe a part of one excuse me for any of it, but many wholeheartedly throw themselves behind what the man who invented it, the theory, called a theory, Darwin, Charles. He himself would have just said evolution, or the fact of evolution, or these are the facts I found. No, it was a theory he developed. Many in the universities have been hoodwinked, and I'm sure at one time Mr. Dawkins was, or Dick, as well. And then he purveys it to as many people as he can, in many ways as he can, either through books or, as I say, videos or movies. And, well, more power to him. We've all got to spend our money on something. And if he feels, good about that, and then that makes his life feel complete, and he sleeps well at night and has no worries and doesn't turn to alcohol or drugs, and then maybe he's fine, and he doesn't hurt any others. But the fact that he drives others down, a path that's, let's say, contrary to their inert, deep understandings and faith in something that created them, well, he's responsible for that if he's done any of that. He's the leader of a sort of cabal of now only 3 since Christopher Hitchens died of cancer. And that gentleman was asked, now that you're dying and close to being, passed on, do you have any reason to feel you might change your view? And Christopher Hitchens, probably one of the most, or the least personal with regard to his attacks or expressions of his beliefs, was answered no, really, in the affirmative. And he was asked this by Brian Lamb of C-SPAN just some months before he died. What did he die in? 2011. It's now 2015, October 2 at about 2:41 p.m. in the afternoon, Mountain Standard Time, USA. Anyway, on to Mr. Dawkins. I pardon you, Mr. Dawkins, if you are offended by the term Mr., but at least I'm calling you Mr. I don't demand such. You just call me Bob. Or Gishi. That's who I am, Gishi. And so you can address me as such if you want to, dispute this video or anything in it. I'll try to stay as close to the facts as I can. I think so far what I've said is fairly correct. In any case, Dawkins builds the case that there's no logical reason nor proof, as there isn't with evolution. There's more for actually the different faiths and their beliefs than there are for evolution. Anyway, by using those, facts about evolution. He's developed an idea that there just really isn't anything about any religious practice or belief regarding God that is true, reliable, or even credible. Well, I guess one could make that statement, and one could make that statement about anything. I believe the sky is blue. I think the evolutionary biologists, or even the physicists, they would say that we're looking at particles and therefore there's no truth. We can't see it because our eyeballs can't see particles. But I believe if I asked a man in China, or a man in India, or a man in the deep parts of the South American continent, or South Africa, or even in the Falkland Islands, or in Argentina, or over into the Philippines, Guam, Japan, if you said, is the sky blue? Well, they'd have a different word for it, and you'd ask it in a different language, but they'd say, yes, I look up and I see blue. Well, that's an incontrovertible fact. The fact that I die. Entropy is a fact. I mean, there's nothing on this earth that doesn't come to an end, that its functionary process ceases, and that we pass away. At least the part of our body that breathes leaves. We have our last breath and it's gone. But they say for 30 minutes there's a detectable presence in the room of that spirit that was once within the man or the woman or the child or the animal, the beast. Is detectable, as I say. So anyway, Dawkins would use his contention that it's ridiculous to just simply display I guess you'd say a visual and audio presentation that would seem to prove it. I don't find the proof, though, as I watch. And I've given it an honest reading and watching and thinking, and even said, well, if I go with an atheist's viewpoint, that their belief that there is no God, and it is a belief, atheism, as opposed to theism, is a belief or a proposition that theism it doesn't exist. There is no such thing as theism. A theist, whereas on the other hand, so termed in English, someone who believes there's a God. Now, that God is characterized in many different ways, but nevertheless, a theist from one end of the globe to the other believes in a creation story, a right mode of existence, and a set of morals. And I don't think that Dawkins has any of those, or with any, well, at least with any reason other than his own. He hasn't adopted anything. Now, number one, his chief statement, oft repeated, is I think he says, I'm worried about the children. I heard one person, I think it was a rabbi, he said, no, it's very nice of you, but why are you worried? What is your concern about? And, wow, Dawkins really didn't have an answer for that. Like, really, Richard, why? What are you worried about? Are you concerned that the fact that I would believe that there is a creator? is worrisome to you, I'm not sure how that's offensive. My life's really none of your business. My life's none of my business. But you seem to want to make it your business what I believe. And on that count alone, I find anything else you say to be non-credible or not credible. That you would have a worry. Why do you have a worry, Mr. Dawkins, or Dick, Richard, or Professor? I guess you could call me Mr. Bian, if you'd like. Anyway, I think our age follows the same track, and you just found a different way to believe. I'm sure as a youth that you were. That's the other thing. Because of the youth, they're concerned that the so-called brainwashing received as a youth then infects the mind like what he calls a mem, I believe, and it's a term nobody has picked up on or used or really bothers with. But in any case, it's a kind of learned and almost like sycophant, the type of device within the body, like a bacteria or a parasite, that feeds on the offerings of a being. Many are very necessary to the life and living of a being. But anyway, so he considers what we believe, myself as a Roman Catholic, a Christian, and comfortably so, and doesn't bother my life in any way. It only enhances it. I've tried at times to do without it, and I've tried largely to do with it, and I find that doing with it is far more beautiful and large. I find Mr. Dawkins' life very small, like tiny. He's allowed his mind to go hardly anywhere. In a relationship with this creator, or this originator of all that we see, in perfection, really. Einstein said, all I can tell by looking at everything very deeply and for a long time is that it only tells me that something must have created it. It's too perfect. Now, why Dawkins, having been a biologist, but I think more of an evolutionary biologist, not strictly a biologist, finds it offensive to think that it was organized and created, especially the mathematics of it, so perfectly that he can attack the fact that it may have originated in some intelligent source, or say there was an intelligent source to create it, to designed it. Some would say intelligent design, or creationists. I don't find myself necessarily in either of those camps, but I believe deeply that there is a creator. Take a piece of fruit, for example. Pineapple is a good example. You take a very rough-skinned pineapple from the grocery store or the fruit and vegetable market, or from the small markets that abound worldwide. And should they have a pineapple or any kind of fruit, but I pick a pineapple because it's really the most interesting. If you cut it vertically, or horizontally, either you wish, but vertically in particular, right from the very top to the bottom, and then you look at it. Often we just chop them up and eat them, or they're chopped up and put in cans and then we eat them. or they're in slices. But if you take a moment to just look at the two halves that lie in front of you after you cut it, and you look at it, there's some things you can notice quite well. Is the perfection in the way it's made. The center is the core of its existence, and then there seem to be branches out to the edges that gain it the light and the energy and the source of growth that it needs. And you can see obviously that it grew from a very small little seed. We don't really know the mechanics of that entirely, although some would say they do. I've yet to read or see or listen to any professor adequately delineate that process. In any case, take a tomato. When you open it up, immediately you see the seeds. And a similar kind of construction. A pear is a good example, although the lines out to the edges aren't quite as noticeable. If you take a strawberry, that's a great example. Its inner core is very tightly protected by a lighter, almost circular thing, and some of the best are the vegetables, like let's see, any of them really. Any actually growing thing, you see that there's a center that marches out to the edge and collects what it needs to, which has a skin on it, which protects the inner workings. Well, we humans have a skin too, and we have a core and a center. We would call that the bowels, or the heart of a thing, of a human. Well, in that heart, which is greatly protected by a very hard chest and backbone, and pumps away the blood and takes it to the extremities, and well, if you think about the wisdom of that creation and how it lends itself to every other created thing, not necessarily a rock or some asphalt, but any living thing. It has its source, it has its center, it has its root that is fed by the creation, or the nature of the creation of the body, of the outside of the core. Well, the core of the human seems to be a soul. However nurtured depends on the stifling of the allowance. Mr. Dawkins would prefer to stifle that, interrupt it, or stop it altogether, in hopes that he would have a larger crew to buy his books and videos. And then, who knows, maybe he goes home and drinks. He looks like he has lots of red on his cheeks. That's often, at least from my experience, a sign of a drinker. They get the vessels malfunction on the cheeks. It's very noticeable, but it can be caused of rosacea, or some sort of. It can be called many things and caused by different things, but usually it's from drinking over a long period of time. Now that can very much retard the ability of the mind, to properly develop. My guess is at one point in Mr. Dawkins' life, he decided not to develop any longer. In fact, he regressed to the pre-faith days when he did have faith. My guess is he did. And we need to nurture that for Richard so that it's allowed to grow despite himself. because I think he could be a great contender for the faith. Now, I am no apologist, and nor do I have any particular axe to grind for anything. I try to nurture my spiritual life in the best way I know how, and continue trying every day. It's a whole new experience, and there are additional things to know and learn. It's almost like a never-ending wonder spectacle, especially within the mind and in the heart. The mind is a very powerful thing, but the heart might not necessarily have power, but it has effect and affect, but crushed and when the bowels are as he says, that he's worried about the way they are taught, or the way they are manipulated, he would say, or controlled or brainwashed. Really worries him. Richard, please, tell me sometime, what are you worried about? Why don't you worry about Richard? Now you may say the same to me. Why don't I worry about Gishi? Well, I don't particularly worry. I try and accept and consider God as very loving and kind, as it would display in the sacred writings everywhere. There's no tough and tumble God. If you find that reading, well, it's because, or listening, it's because you weren't listening. The ears often can be just blocked, like I can't hear myself now, especially if I go like this, la 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 la, people do, I can't hear you. Well, Richard, I do hear you, and I find it necessary to at least comment on that, and say that you need to work a little harder, in the sense that attempt to understand from a personal standpoint what it might be to look up into the heavens or into your own heart and say, okay, they say you're here. Well, let me know. I'd like some sort of a sign. I did that one day, and I was in a forested area outside of a neighborhood in Dallas, Texas, and many decades ago. And I said, well, if you're there, or if this is what you want me to do, give me a sign. I'm like some of those people that told Jesus, do a miracle. We'll be more interested. And he said back, well, you are an evil and perverse generation. You look for a sign. And so he made a sign anyway. So this blackbird, I think it was a blackbird, came squawking out of a tree and burst upon the path that I was on, just grazing the top of my head as it screeched, and then disappeared onto the other side of the path, into the dark woods. It was getting to be past dusk, or just past, and there were some distant lights and for the street lights, but this was a very dense Texas forest. And Texas is in the United States. It's a state in the South. It borders New Mexico, Oklahoma, I believe Louisiana, or Mississippi, and or not Louisiana, whatever, it's down south on the Gulf of New Mexico. Galveston would be right on the coast. Dallas would be a little north, or much further north, and a very large town, but Houston's very large. Austin is there, but anyway, I said, well, that's good enough for me. It was. I said, the moment I asked for the sign. So I might say Richard or Dick or Professor or Mr. Dawkins. Whichever it is, I really don't know. You've never expressed how you wish to be called. But I'm sure to your students, unless you're emeritus now, you express a requirement to address me in such a way. I've never heard that. So for me, you're another man who walks the earth. Whatever your credentials are, matter not. That just means you went to school, passed some tests, and memorized some things. I'm sure you have a doctorate of some sort. I really don't care. Doctorates can be obtained after a few years of study and reportage to the committee, and once they give you permission. And then once that book-sized paper or small book-sized paper is done and well written and usually double-spaced, they give you a grade and they decide whether to pronounce you a doctor. Whereas an actual doctor of medicine, the experience level there is very high, because those gentlemen are living in the environment of an emergency room where knife and gun injuries and heart attacks and the onsets of cancer and just the many ways the body can deteriorate. Maybe respiratory problems that are acute, high levels of pain, unknown causes, or at first, different kinds of tests and scans and blood tests all have to be done and analyzed, and decisions have to be made on a very important life-threatening basis. Whereas being a doctor of something, that's a rather minor thing, really, because the practical appliance or the practical application is very limited. It's very small. And the way Mr. Dawkins has used his is to promote the non-existence of God. I am worried a bit, Richard, in how much you've tried to affect the little ones, the children, or those impressionable ones who listen to you without warning and are scandalized. Really, their whole minds are just scandalized by the information that you give in such an authoritative way. It would be nice if you started every video with, well, this is my opinion. These are some things that I found out, or after some analysis of both sides, honestly, I fell somewhere in the middle and it was here. Or I'm a totally closed-minded atheist, against theism. I don't believe in I don't believe in a God. No theology. No theism. Therefore, no theology. And so you might say, I'm going to proceed from the standpoint of trying to convince you as an audience that I'm trying to convince you otherwise than what you do believe. Showing no evidence yourself, because there really is no evidence against a God. Rather, there's a giant bit of evidence for a God. If you just take the recent discoveries of the walls of the palace of King David in Jerusalem, giant, long, or the Pool of Shalom, or some have even thought they found Jericho. Strange, very unique dwelling places of ancient Hebrews. The land of Israel is chock full of biological and, archaeological and anthropological proof. As well, we have the numerous texts and such that exist, more so than any other. Their consistency, quantity, on papyrus and vellum is just phenomenal, really. I doubt that there would be even one for your own understanding. I don't know if there's a screed on atheism. Now, you may know different. I don't study atheism as far as what is the antecedents of where you find yourself today. If in fact you still do, I haven't seen anything or heard anything or read anything very, very recent. You would think on your deathbed you'd have a chance, like we all do, to meet our Maker moments later after we breathe our last. Now, that's not any sort of a fear thing, that's a fact. You either meet your Maker or you, as you would feel, disappear into the ground and you're gone. All that's left behind is dusty pages and worn out videos that probably won't even work on devices 50 years from now. I'm sure the fellows that thought their saddles ought to be kept somewhere around 1920, just in case the automobile that was zooming down the street, left, was no longer in existence, they could still throw the old saddle back on the horse. In any case, the things that you've thrown out and produced will be like that, as well as this video. However, the written things will probably survive, because some smart person is stockpiling in some monster library all the books that have been scanned into the internet or into the computer and databases and then produced and put on the internet for people to read, so that they don't have to go to the different libraries. And although I believe Harvard's is the largest library of any kind in the United States, I may be wrong, but University of Texas, I believe, and Texas A&M is one of the Texas, but they have a lot too, but on different subjects like Vietnam or something. Stanford's has a respectable library, but through what they used to call the AutoCAD system, you could get any book you wanted for a week. Now on the internet, they're in the process of scanning everything into the internet, which if electricity went down, it would be worthless. Books would be the only thing you have to learn. So thankfully, Richard, you've given us some books that we can continue to study and understand your views and made-up words like mem, and that nobody has cotton to or cares about, really. Hasn't reached the... In fact, when whoever's listening to this hears mem, they probably go, now what's a mem? Well, it's a gene, a sort of copycat word for gene. It's the damaging gene in the system that leads one to God. Well, I suppose there is a God gene. They already found the God particle. Hobbes, or what, I forget their names, but just last year, or the year before, Hobson, oh gosh, I forget, but they have termed it a God particle. It's one they can only describe as such. They did it through just a very long, tubular, it just crashed together, and there it was. What others had thought was always there, but they didn't find a device that would expose it. And let's see, what is it called? Well, you can look it up. Just look up God particle on some encyclopedia. Maybe Wikipedia has something adequate. And I find YouTube and Wikipedia as two very simple and easy sources for fairly good information. But I'll bet if you look on Richard Dawkins' Wikipedia site, it is good for, births and deaths and lives and cities and things like that. But I think he can self-citate and, eliminate things. And like if you look up Paul Simon's, the team and the Simon and Garfunkel pop singers in the mid to early 70s, when they, I believe, broke up. But Paul Simon is obviously a theist. His song "Mrs. Robinson" is populated with the word Jesus constantly. Now that happens to be my central focus is our Lord. In the older parts of the Bible, it would call him your Lord. I wish to worship your Lord. Somebody had a faith in something that seemed to work, and so they wanted to get involved with their Lord. However, we now say it's our Lord, our common boss, or it's actually more like a lover, or more like friend, or more like brother. Now, Mr. Dawkins, I would assume you're alone, without a true friend in the universe. That's got to be a horrible, almost shocking and deliberately on your part, vacant spot to exist in. And there are others that you've dragged down with you, and there are things said about people like that. Now, dragging you and others away from such atheistic views, who are certainly very irate by this time in this video, is, I think, a more laudable effort. However, it's just off the top of my head, as all my videos are. I don't prepare them. I don't think ahead. I don't make notes. I don't make an outline. Well, that may be obvious, but I think you'll find I'm pretty fair in saying these are my opinions as a theist within the Roman Catholic Church, and which is widely variant in its offerings from different purveyors of the faith within it, the priests, the laity, the religious, even the magisterium, the bishops and the papal pronouncements. But the ecumenical councils, or the councils of those bishops, appointed by whatever pope was the pope at the time, they had matriculated to the point where they were to be elected or appointed as a bishop in apostolic succession, right back to Peter. I don't think there would be anything like that for an atheistic view. It would go back so far, but not very far. It's a relatively new phenomena with regard to the concerted efforts of those like yourself. So I think if you introduced your videos in that way, or your books, and say, well, listen, this is just some new stuff, and relatively speaking, and it is highly anti-something, which is anti-theism. In fact, I think some of your books are titled There Is No God or something, or maybe you adopted the Nietzsche idea of God is dead. Although, he spent the last 25 years, I think, at his sister's. He was totally crazy. Couldn't even care for himself. Well, that was just a biological happening. It had nothing to do, I don't think, with his life activities. But, I mean, even he had some clauses and addendums to thoughts that, if you read closely, were there. And also, as he went along, he was sure to say at all times, so this is my opinion. This is what I've come to as a philosopher and writer. However, Mr. Dawkins, you don't say such. That would be the only real concern that I have. You're free to say and do and use your resources and your mind and your voice and to do anything you wish, as we all are. We're free thinkers. We're free doers. We're free beings. Things that exist that can make decisions as allowed, which are basically allowed to do anything. I think you and folks like Foucault and Sartre and well, you could throw Nietzsche in there, or go back to the Russian nihilists of the early 1860 periods, like Chernyavsky or what's his name, Debulov, however you pronounce it, or Herzen, the printer, that from England smuggled the writings back. And back further, there are people in the 1800s, 1900s, and in the 2000s. But prior to that, it's hard to think of a famous rank atheist. But you could say some of the Greeks were in some ways, like say the Stoics or the Epicureans, but were atheistic, but they still had their gods that they paid tribute to in the city at the different temples. I would doubt any of them, not that I've heard, wrote anything that would say, In fact, Plato, what did he walked around in rags and yelled at people saying, hey, be careful, watch out, what you're doing is nuts. And I guess Socrates, or the opposite, wrote about the other and said this is what he did. Much like a monk type in India, basically naked, sitting on the side of the road, meditating and prophesying that something is up here. You all need to pay attention. And, well, that's kind of what I'm saying. Hey, something's up here. It's time to pay attention. Maybe look at your sacred writings, whatever they might be. If they're the Bhagavad Gita and the body of work that it is within, and or the Confucian writings, or the stories of Buddha. Although Buddha was a kind of atheist. And the pre-Incan, or the Incas in the Mayans, they had ideas about a creator, strong ideas. The Egyptians, they didn't just come by that all by themselves. The Hittites in particular, had a certain understanding of God. They were the population that lived in sort of central eastern Turkey, sort of synonymously with, or at the same time as the Egyptians, except not as for a longer period of time. Or the Babylonians, or the in Mesopotamia, the Persians, the Romans, really any civilization of note, the Hindus, which I don't think they really like being called the Hindus. I haven't yet figured out what it is. I haven't talked to one and said, hey, what is it you guys really are about? The Hare Krishnas, kind of an outgrowth of that whole situation. The people in Nepal and the mountains there, and the Muslims, a giant example of people who understand there is a God. And the Jews, just the central focus of the Abrahamic faiths, which are Christianity, Judaism, and Muslims. All draw their beginning from the faith of Abraham. Now, Richard, why is it that you can't throw your your resources in the ring with so many and giant cloud of witnesses that hover over you, and the guardian angel, which is today's obligatory day to remember. Each one of us have a personal guardian angel. I believe that, Richard, despite your own efforts, you have one, and probably has cared for you along the way in ways you've even recognized. And messengers, of course, angels, of course, are just that, messengers from God. In fact, many of the first occasions of individuals in the Bible to meet what they might think of, or at least experience God, they thought of as angels, messengers from. No one really thought they saw God. Moses is the prime example of someone that would not be in that group. The writings would say or promote the idea that he did. And now Jesus, on the other hand, it is said he's the one that descended from and then ascended back to. Now, where would you think that would be, Mr. Dawkins? Or do you just don't believe Jesus existed at all, and all these things written and found about him are just fake or made up? Or maybe you believe in the idea that the Romans, in order to placate the Jews, wrote them all that material. What do they call that? The Flavius Josephus theory. That Josephus was such a learned Jew, he could put all of it together and make up this character. I think those are absurd assertions. And what you've done to our young people, and now adults, is, I think, unforgivable, really, should you persist and never change. Words are important. Change, which is the word we see represented as repent, is probably repellent to you. All it means is, well, this is where I am now, turn around and maybe look the other way. I'm not sure you have. At least I haven't heard you say, or nothing you've read, I've read, that. Of course, I haven't exhaustively looked at every book you've written, and nor have I seen every video or listened to every lecture. But I know that theology is not your specialty. Whereas some of us have made theology our specialty, our sort of center focus of real study. The proof of it, the non-proof of it, the theories against it, the theories for it, the types of varieties of that. I know you've interviewed many people from many different faiths, always derisively, except for the creationist woman you interviewed. She really had you running. I almost laughed out loud, really. I saw you coming at her, and all she did is just a simple woman in Texas, the blonde, just obviously, in her simplicity, snuck up on you and really asked you some serious questions that you were unable to answer. And if you relook at that video and offer it, a subsequent one that would say, well, now here's why I lost it, and here's what I might say. Or maybe go interview her again and say, now in response to this, I've thought about it. But she had it right on the tip of her tongue. You weren't prepared. Obviously, you hadn't done your reading, and the very simple propositions that the creationists offer. Well, all this goes back, at least in America, the Scopes trial, Well, you know, it's William Jennings Bryan was not prepared for the onslaught of the atheism and erudition of the opposition, uh, because he was a simple man of faith. Um, Too bad he wasn't president. If he wasn't into the silver and everything, he would have been. But anyway, William Jennings Bryan didn't become a president. I think he ran 3 times, didn't he? And never did win. The great story is the socialist that got, I think, 3 to 6 million votes back in the teens, maybe somewhere 19 in the election in 16. Was thrown in jail, or either before or after. And now we have Barry Sanders in this section of time. I don't really follow the news or care much about it. It's, as someone I knew closely one time said, if you change the dates on the papers produced in different years, that's all that would change. It's the date. The information within is pretty much the same. Wars and killings and abuse and tales of woe and feature articles about entertainment. So really, I don't know why anyone would even waste their time re-listening to stuff that's been said over and over, or even thinking the sky is falling. Now, someone may look at this video 5 years from now when the sky does fall, who thinks it's going to, and say, see what that guy said, he's dead now, and a rock fell on him. But I've been hearing these kinds of predictions since the 70s when I was at the university, and the professors would say, oh my gosh, we don't have enough food, and oh my gosh, enough room. Well, I used to take drives away from the urban areas and out into the vast countrysides here in the U.S., and actually tremendously vast. Sometimes in the winter, when the wheat winter wheat was growing, and the tans and the giant blues in the sky, I think, what are these guys saying? There's plenty of room out here. All they got to do is lay some pipe and put some connections down, and the homes would have running water, run some electricity wires, and throw in a few TVs, and everything would be like it is in the urban centers. They just have to build the shopping centers and the stores, and that's a little off topic, but nevertheless, I don't see any edifices built for the atheists to gather, other than the universities, where our children go and get infected with these horrible notions of zeroness. I mean, it leaves them without hope. Well, the good thing is, they were, as you would say, indoctrinated as youths with the truth, or at least the idea that there was truth, the gain. So, until my next rambling about Mr. Dawkins, but I doubt I'll waste any more time, but I thought it was worth spending this morning as I went about my day. It's a Friday, and now it's about 3:31 p.m. and it gives me an hour and a half of business to do, but I don't even think I'll do that. I think I'll just relax and enjoy the remainder of the sun, which probably will be till 6:30, so 3 hours, and perhaps take a walk and exercise these old bones and try and eat well. I need to eat. But I wish you well, Mr. Dawkins, and I wish all the peace you can gain in the world. I'm not sure where it would come from. From within is usually chaos, unless the soul is is nurtured and paid attention to and gotten in touch with and felt and understood, and a connection made with the very creator, the breath, that entered the body at the very moment that birth can, this must be a very traumatic thing, or those babies wouldn't, or all of us wouldn't have screamed. None of us come out peaceful, because the air is somewhat, the use of the respiratory system has never been needed. So, Mr. Dawkins, you have a respiratory system, you have a mind, and you have strength, and you have a heart, and you do have a soul. And so I'm hoping maybe that this tends to it a little bit. And my hope would also be that you cease trying to destroy the hope and the understanding of the soul within so many people that have been infected and affected by what you've purveyed. I'm not going to say that you're a bad guy or an evil person. I don't think you are. I think you're simply misguided, and you have a motivation. I don't know what it is. I don't know what you're personally up to and what you're trying to feel free to do. If you were free of your inclinations, whatever they might be, you'd probably be free to meet, this creator of yours. In fact, you probably already have. You just have sort of brushed him to the side for the moment. Just reach over and, pull him back, or it back, or she back, and say hello, or scream hello, and see what bird comes, zooming down across your head as a little bit of a sign. You probably desire one. But in any case, hello, you're talking to a man of faith here, and a humble one at that, one that's very appreciative of my path that's been, however, lurching and difficult. The journey, like the Jews in the desert, has been a fruitful one. My land of Canaan, which are my inclinations, have been roundly defeated. Not by me. And who knows for how long. I'm not taking any day, moment, or hour for granted. I only hope that I can increase in kindness and patience with all that I see. However, Richard, I don't think you require any patience or kindness. I would bet you're only patient and kind with those that you approve of. Would be my guess. If you listen to Ayn Rand being interviewed by Wallace in the 50s in black and white, Ayn Rand will say that. He'll say, why aren't you interested in charity? Oh, because I only help people that think the way I do, which is clearly delineated in the characters of her books, Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. But that was just post-Sartre by a decade. So, enjoy your postmodernism and post-structuralism friends, and whatever now they're terming their no-truth ideas. But I'm here to tell you that this is skin, and I can feel myself pinching it. It's true, I exist at the moment. And it is also true that entropy will cause me to be gone. And it is true that on one day I was born. Those are all truths. How you can deny that there is a truth, I don't know. And further, that there might be a spirit, a soul, that your body houses, that needs nurturing or watering. Well, maybe we're trying to water it here a little bit for you. Give Jesus a chance, or whichever faith tickles your fancy, but I think you'll find the confines of the Roman Catholic Church to be quite inviting. Just walk in. They don't take tickets, and they don't analyze your person on the way in, and you can sit anywhere. You could even go to communion without telling anyone. Probably wouldn't be right, but go ahead. I gave my son communion when he was only 5. He wanted it so badly. I gave him a little piece of mine. I got in trouble one time for bringing the whole thing back because he wanted to see it and what it was. The host, the person who invites people to the wedding, to his wedding. Well, you're invited, Mr. Dawkins. The doctors only come for the sick. And you may be very spiritually sick, I don't know. You may be actually spiritually dead, which is another word for worthless. You just lay there, your spirit, and it performs no function. However, yourself is obviously, and your ego is, plenty alive and moving throughout the universe. Well, good luck with that. Peace to you, and peace to all your adherents, and peace to all the listeners that have maybe bothered to hear this. I don't know all the ins and outs of YouTube and Google Plus and all Gmail, all the things that the Google people own. Brilliant in making money. But nevertheless, I'll figure it out. And but for now, this will be a video I'll eventually upload. And I hope most of Mr. Dawkins reads it. I believe I will title it Anti-Dawkins or Against Dawkins. Something that once typed in would come up. There's so much about you on YouTube and all over the internet. Because of your assertions and ideas, and so many find you comforting. I don't know. It's prickly, to me, but I'm not afraid of prickly. In fact, I'll march right into the prickly bush and with some snippers and cut it down, if necessary. I felt this video was necessary, and if you have a rebuttal, you can email me at gishbian at outlook.com. I think my phone number is on my, let's see, somewhere. I'm not going to give that out on this video, but if you put a comment from Richard Dawkins and somehow credentialize that with your email in Oxford, Cambridge on Oxford, I'd be glad to write and begin a dialogue, but I would think either you've dismissed me or you're extremely afraid. Now, I hate to be so forthcoming in that fashion, but I'm hoping that you're now worried about me or us, those of us that are concertedly faithful and understand that the world have been created, and that we exist to connect with that Creator in a big way, at least once a week. It's better, all day long. Okay, Richard, and all goodbye and peace and love.